I've covered cutting and putting together of some pieces of granite out of small slab form. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you the assembly of them. And I'm going to give you some really important tips as to how you yourself can do it. It's pretty simple. And if you've gotten this far, if you've followed the previous videos, you've seen me cutting and mitering, you see how it's relatively straightforward. It's something that just about anybody can do with some practice with the tools. And I'm going to show you how, with some very simple, commonly available materials, you can put together a base, or any object for that matter, yourself. So let's get to it. Last video, I think that there was one thing that I hadn't really shown very accurately, and I wanted to cover. That was mixing of the polyester resin and adding color to it. So a few little tricks that will save you time and loss of material, since it's not cheap, just like all epoxies and other resins are. They're all pricey these days, so you don't want to waste it. But if you pre-mix color ahead of time and then divide it up into smaller manageable portions, it reduces the amount of loss that you'll have, because the working time is greatly shortened when you add pigment to it. So if normally you'd have an average between 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the temperature, to work it, it'll be down to about a minute or two maximum. Sometimes it's as little as 30 seconds to work with it. And so you really want to keep it down to, single applications or small portions, so that you don't waste the glue. So what I've done is I went ahead and I glued the second base that I was showing you in pieces in the last video. And now what I'm doing is because this one, the cuts were not quite as accurate as I wanted them to be, but it's no waste. That happens sometimes. When you're hand cutting things, they're not always going to be perfect. So you can take advantage of the fact that they're not perfect, as long as you have a good color. So what I've done is I've raked out one of the joints. When I say raked out, I've cut it back with a utility knife, just on the surface. And that's the other thing that I particularly like about polyester, is it's softer and friendlier to work with than epoxy, because when epoxy goes off, it goes off very brittle, and there's not a lot you can do with it. But when it comes to polyester, there's a lot more things you can do with it. You can get a lot more creative with it. There's all kinds of little tricks that you can develop with a bit of experience. And I won't cover even a fraction of those today, but what I will do is I'll show you how you can, after a joint is secured and is structurally all together, you can go back and you can rework the joint without disturbing the surrounding stone. And you can't really do that very easily with epoxy. I have a small amount of glue here, and just enough for that joint. And the color is a little bit more favorable than it was before. I put in more pigment than I had the first time. They were a little light. And it's really that simple. Again, when you're working with other materials other than granite, there are different circumstances that are how the stone behaves. So if this was a more porous material, it would absorb the oils from the epoxy and it would leave behind stains. But in this case, since this is a honed granite, the conditions are really perfect. You know, I can be as messy as I want with this, and I don't have to worry about it because it'll just easily hone off the surface without any kind of effect. And then just use the balance of the glue to top up the bottoms of the miters. So when you're gluing, once it's together, then you can fill in all the joints. One of the other properties about polyester that I think is notable is you can control the amount of catalyst or hardener that you add to it, and that controls how it behaves, which is interesting for different uses. You can, if you mix less hardener to it, it stays quite soft and pliable. It just kind of almost semi-cures, but doesn't completely cure, which can be used to your advantage for certain applications. And then if you add uh, much more hardener to it, then it goes off quite hard. So you really get the full control over how it sets up and then how you use it for the different applications. And I'll talk about that in the future. Why, even though epoxy has its uses, polyester is, in a lot of cases, far superior. It's more user friendly, and the end results are potentially better. Okay, so now that the glue has gone off and I've scraped it back, so this is just a few minutes later. It's already set up strong enough that you can work with it, and so now the next stage is just working it in with I'm using a diamond pad, but you can use. I could use a sandpaper with a bit of a sanding block, or I could use a rubstone. So you don't have to have fancy diamond tools to do this kind of a job. I usually just kind of grab whatever's on hand, and if it works, it works. Sometimes sometimes you need a little bit of water just to make it work better. Even though these pads can be used both wet and dry. they're really only any good when they're wet, especially when it comes to hard materials. When it comes to granite, I find that cutting it is quite quick. Shaping it is quite quick because it's nice and hard. But when it comes to the finishing of it, it slows it down a little bit. You're never really happy with the finish until you've spent a bit of time on it. Okay, so the next stage is putting together the body of the lamp base. And as you can see, I've got this set up, and I'm just using this as a reference. You can use this kind of an idea for any kind of when you're gluing miters or any kind of pieces together. It's always handy to have some kind of blocks on hand. In this case, you can use concrete blocks. I've just got them clamped together, and that secures one half of the mitered piece. And then I can, you know, obviously you square it up off the bench. So you start out with getting this one plumb square, and then everything else sets up off of that. So it just gives you a secure way to start out. But you can use pieces of stone or whatever. But whatever you do, just start out with something that you can fasten to. It's a good place to start. So this one is the next one that's going to be glued onto this one is it's square with the bench, and it's square with the first piece, or will be. There you go. And I've worked this miter in just a little bit to make sure that it lines up. So you can just use you can use like a diamond pad, or you can use a pad on a spinner or a grinder that just to sweeten up the edge. And once you've got that all ready, then it's time to glue. Now there's one consideration before I start gluing is, just grab something here. Here we go. Just to have a small piece on hand that I mentioned in the previous video about the property of this polyester resin to, when it sets up, it has a tendency to shrink, especially in warm weather. So you want to have some kind of a block that you just put in up against the inside to prevent it as it's going off in the final moments, has a tendency to pull, and sometimes the pull can be quite drastic. And you step away for 2 seconds, and that's inevitably when it's going to happen. So you have to keep a close eye on it as it's going off. It goes off very quickly, so you don't have long to wait. But yeah, so you just have something on the inside, some kind of a weight, another piece of stone, just to keep it from kicking in, and that'll keep your piece square. But as it's going off, always keep going back and referring to things, making sure that nothing is shifted, because it doesn't. All it takes is a slight vibration in your bench or anything to throw the piece off. And I have this glue already mixed up from the last piece for the base, so it's ready to go. I just add the catalyst or the hardener to it. And I've these base pieces are quite well undercut, so there's lots of room for glue, but there's also a lot of room for getting a nice tight face. So if you try to keep most of the glue on the inside and just skim it at the face of the miter, then it allows for a nice tight finish. And I like to butter both faces. I find that gives you the best contact. You bring them together, and you don't have to worry about whether or not there's good contact on both sides, because you know that you've spread it on both faces. All these little things you learn from experience. And some people might be saying, well, that kind of sounds like common sense, but sometimes at the moment common sense isn't always that common, if you will. So it's handy just sometimes just to hear another person's advice on things, even if it's really rudimentary stuff. It can still be a handy little tip if it's something that you hadn't considered. So I've got a very, very light bit on the face. Just as it's going off, I'm going to give it a double check. Yeah. See, my block had shifted on the inside, and I noticed that it was already starting to get pulled off square. Doesn't take a lot. Okay, that's good. So again, like I said, that's these are the little things. Basically, just is a repeat of this for every single joint for both pieces. I won't. I'll spare you the boredom of watching me glue miters. It's kind of just slightly more exciting than watching paint dry. Cut a groove. I think drilling this is, it's not out of the question, but it's a lot of drilling, and then also cutting out a chase for the wire for a staple. So I think I'll just cut a continuous band once this is together. And what that does is that should the polyester ever fail, not that I've ever seen it fail, but if it does fail, that prevents these pieces from just folding out, flopping out. And anytime you epoxy or glue anything, no matter what, even if you're really confident that there's no possible way for it to fail, always use some kind of a backup, a staple or a continuous wire tie, something, or even a piece of stone on top with pins drilled through, just something to physically lock it. That's really important no matter what you do, whether it's exterior or interior. It's really important practice. You can never assume that synthetic resin is going to be enough to hold together heavy pieces of stone. Yeah, that's all. I've said my piece about gluing. That's it. I won't bore you any more about it. So the next video will be probably the big reveal. After that, we're on to some new work. So that's it for today.